You know, for almost all of human history, the very instruction manual that builds each and every one of us was totally locked away. It was a book written in a language we just couldn't read. But then, in the 1990s, this group of, well, you could call them biological hackers, they decided it was finally time to crack the code. And their plan? To give it all away to the entire world for free.
Just let that sink in for a second. Every single one of us is built from this incredible source code, 3 billion letters of DNA. And the goal these scientists set, to read that entire code from the very beginning to the very end? I mean, it was one of the most audacious, craziest scientific projects anyone had ever even thought of.
I mean, look at that number. That's the scale of the challenge we're talking about, 3 billion letters. To give you some perspective, if you tried to read that code out loud, just one letter every second, it would take you almost 100 years. And yet, a small group of scientists looked at that impossible number and said, yeah, let's do it. They decided it was time to read the whole book, and in the process, they were about to create a whole new philosophy for science.
Okay, so you'd think this massive project about the human code would start with, well, humans, right? Nope. The crazy thing is it all began with a much, much humbler creature, a tiny, transparent little worm called C. elegans. This little guy, this is where the whole open-source spirit of the revolution actually got its start.
And this idea, this nematode ethos, was really driven by two key scientists, John Sulston and Robert Waterston. Now, these guys had already been working on mapping the worm's genome, and while they were doing it, they came up with this really powerful philosophy that was about to change, well, pretty much everything.
So their approach was, well, Sulston himself called it a brute force method, and it was a total game changer. This wasn't about delicate, elegant little experiments in a lab. No way. This was about turning biology into something like an industrial factory, using assembly lines, robotics, and a whole lot of early computing power to just crunch massive, massive amounts of data. And that was the moment biology officially became a big data problem.
And this quote, this really gets to the absolute heart of their philosophy. Their core belief was that scientific data shouldn't be some private commodity you hoard and sell. It should be a shared resource for the entire community. So they released their data from the Worm Project almost as soon as they had it, because they were convinced that this kind of openness would speed up discovery for everyone. And that nematode ethos, right there, that became the blueprint for the whole Human Genome Project.
Okay, so having a philosophy is great. But, you know, it's not enough when you've got billions of dollars and literally the future of medicine on the line. This big idea of open data had to be made official. It needed to be turned into a set of rules, a law, really. They basically had to write a constitution to make sure the human genome couldn't just be locked up behind a bunch of corporate patents.
And it all came down to this one simple but huge question. Who owns your DNA? I mean, really think about that. This was at the center of a massive debate, and the fear was not just theoretical, it was very real. There was a company, Myriad Genetics, that had actually patented the BRCA genes, the ones linked to a higher risk of breast cancer. And that just sparked this huge public outrage. The idea that someone could own and control a piece of your own genetic code, it was terrifying.
So, to solve this, in 1996, a group of the world's top scientists got together in Bermuda and hammered out this absolutely radical agreement. The principles themselves were actually pretty simple, but they were so powerful. First, the data belongs to everyone, period. Second, and this was the real game changer, all new DNA sequence data had to be uploaded to public databases within 24 hours. 24 hours! No more hoarding data for months or even years while you wait to publish a paper. This was basically the birth of the scientific commons.
But of course, it's never that simple, right? Just as this new constitution for open science was being created, a brand new, very formidable rival suddenly burst onto the scene. And this set the stage for one of the greatest scientific races in history. It was a battle not just over who could read the code first, but a battle for the very soul of science itself.
So you basically had two teams in this race. On one side, you've got the publicly funded Human Genome Project. They're led by Francis Collins, and their approach is slow, methodical, very careful. They're reading the code clone by clone. Then on the other side, you've got this private company, Celera Genomics, led by the brilliant and frankly very controversial J. Craig Venter. His plan? Go fast, break things, and ultimately lock the genome away behind a subscription paywall.
Venter's strategy was called whole genome shotgun sequencing, and the name is pretty fitting. If the public project was carefully reading the Book of Life, page by page, chapter by chapter, Venter's plan was to throw the entire book into a shredder, blast the tiny fragments into sequencers, and then trust these brand new supercomputers to piece the whole story back together. I mean, most scientists in the public project thought this was completely reckless. A lot of them thought it was just flat out impossible.
And this is where the story gets really, really cyberpunk. Because this wasn't just a battle of biologists in white lab coats. This was a war of algorithms. The public project was relying on open source software, tools that anyone could use, to assemble their sequence. But Celera, they built their own secret proprietary assembler from scratch and ran it on a massive supercomputer. This was a duel being fought with code and silicon.
Man, the pressure was just immense. Solaris was moving at this absolutely breakneck speed, and the public project had no choice but to speed up its own timeline by 5 years. The final stretch was just this frantic, all-out sprint to the finish, and it ended not with a clear winner, but with this really surprising truce, brokered by the White House itself.
So let's just walk through how this all went down, because it's wild. On June 26, 2000, you have President Clinton standing there with both Collins and Venter, announcing a symbolic tie. A working draft of the genome is done. But the race for a real, usable, public version was still very much on. And then, just a few weeks later, an unsung hero emerges, a grad student named Jim Kent. In this absolutely heroic coding sprint, releases his own software called Gig Assemble, and boom, he posts the first public draft of the genome online for free, making sure it belonged to everyone forever.
So yeah, it was called a tie, but in reality, the two methods gave slightly different results. Celera's shotgun method was actually better at piecing together the long-range structure, but the public project's slow and steady approach was way more accurate in all those tricky, repetitive parts of the genome. But here's the real kicker, and this proves the whole value of open data. Celera's final assembly was only possible because they used the public project's data to help build their own. The open project literally fueled the private one.
So when you look back, the race itself, who won, who lost, it kind of becomes less important than the outcome. The real victory here wasn't about who crossed some finish line first. It was about the principle, the foundation that was laid for all the science that came after. And really, this is the ultimate takeaway from this whole story. The greatest legacy of the Human Genome Project isn't the sequence itself, that string of A's, T's, C's, and G's. No, it was making the philosophy of the Bermuda Principles the gold standard. It's what ensured that our shared biological code would be a public resource for all time, not some patented product you have to pay for.
And the impact? I mean, it's been absolutely profound. That simple 24-hour rule basically stopped companies from patenting raw human genes. It led to the creation of GenBank, which is now this massive public database that's the bedrock for pretty much all of modern biology. It just turbocharged research all over the world, and yeah, it paved the direct path for the kind of personalized, precision medicine we're starting to see today.
So in the end, this project did so much more than just read a sequence of letters. It wrote the Constitution for the future of life itself. It made our own source code open source. And that leaves all of us with a pretty big question, right? Now that we've finally read the Book of Life, what are we going to build with it?